Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the number of strikes that the Russians conducted during the previous days. As a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians suffered significant losses, most likely the biggest losses ever since the beginning of the special military operation. So let's start step by step. In this video, for example, we can see how the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover the Ukrainian IRST air defense system and the radar, and as a result of Iskander strike, that IRST system was completely destroyed. Now let's move further in the southern direction. We have additional update from the village, from the vicinity of the village by the name of Zhelobok. In this case, the Russians managed to discover up to three air defense systems Patriot and one radar to the system. The Ukrainians, according to this video, were trying to bring down the Russian Iskander missile, but the Ukrainians failed, and as a result of Iskander strike, the entire Patriot battery was completely destroyed. Obviously, significant losses for the armed forces of Ukraine. And this is not the end. We got additional updates from the city and from the area in the vicinity of the city by the name of Dnipro. On the airfield of Aviatorska, the Ukrainians were preparing the Su-24 for possible attack on Crimea and the Crimean bridge, but the Russians, as a result of Iskander strike, destroyed the Ukrainian Su-24 and didn't allow the Ukrainians to attack the Crimean bridge. Most likely right before this attack, the Russians, or maybe later, the Russians discovered additional Patriot battery to the east of the airfield of Aviatorska. In this photo, in this short episode, we can see two launching systems of the Patriot air defense system and one radar. And the Russians, as a result of Iskander strike, destroyed this battery as well. Obviously, significant losses the Ukrainians suffered during the Kursk offensive operation, and the Russians once again managed to establish complete superiority in the air of Ukraine. The Ukrainians, and I would like to remind you that we haven't been receiving any updates about any Russian massive missile strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine during the previous probably few or 3 weeks or even months. And the thing is that Ukrainians received significant number of air defense systems from the Western countries, and they managed to secure the territory, and the Russians were waiting. But when the Ukrainians began the Kursk offensive operation, and when the Russians increased and intensified their Pokrovsk offensive operation, the Ukrainians were forced to redeploy additional forces, air defense systems as close to the line of combat contact. And by this movement, the Ukrainians revealed their own positions and the Russians destroyed everything. I'm not sure whether the Ukrainians are able to restore their air defense mighty in the very near future. If they can do this, obviously the Western countries would be forced to provide the Ukrainians the air defense systems of their own of their own configuration. Now let's move to the line of combat contact, and we will continue with the Kursk direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, the Ukrainians conducted additional attempts to attack the village of Korineva, and the Ukrainians were trying to break through the Russian defense belt in the vicinity of the village of Troitska and Gordievka. Both those attacks were repelled by the Russians, and the Russians are saying that for these attacks the Ukrainians were using significant number of infantry in every direction. The Ukrainians were using around 120 soldiers and significant number of personnel carriers and armored vehicles. Once again, both attacks were repelled. The Ukrainians suffered losses and were forced to fall back. But as for the village of Glushkovka, and if you remember, we discussed that this is the primary target of the armored forces of Ukraine to take under control everything that is located to the south of the river Seym, and the Ukrainians destroyed the bridge. They managed to destroy the bridge. In this video that was published by the Ukrainians, we can see the bridge in the northern direction of the village of Glushkova, and as a result of attack, the bridge was completely destroyed, and some blocks of the bridge fell down inside of the river. So this video confirms that the Russian logistic collapsed, but later we got additional update also from the pro-Ukrainian sources that the Russians decided not to wait for anything, and they began building significant number of pontoon bridges all over the line of the, let's say, this same river. So for now the Ukrainians have discovered just one pontoon bridge in this direction, but most likely in the very near future we're going to see dozens of the pontoon bridges along the entire river, with the purpose to secure the situation in this area and not to allow the Ukrainians to capture this small pocket. Now let's move further. The Ukrainians continue the concentration of their forces in the vicinity of Zhuravli. The Russians, of course, see everything. The Russians, as you can see, managed to improve their reconnaissance drones significantly. Currently, the Russians are investing a lot of resources exactly in this technology. They want to see everything, and most likely the Russians have very good picture of the battle of Ukraine during the 24 hours, and they concentrated additional batch of the forces of the armed forces of Ukraine in this forest, and as a result of attack, the Russians deal significant damage to the Ukrainians. Now let's move to the eastern flank. We have additional updates. The Ukrainians managed to improve their positions inside of the village of Cherkasskaya Porечная and Russkaya Porечная. Today the Russian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Ukraine armored vehicle that was moving, vehicles that were moving through the village in different part of the village. This video confirms, and these episodes confirm, that Ukrainians managed to establish strong control over the territory and to force the Russians to fall back. The Russians reported that Ukrainians were trying to move further through Cherkasskaya Porечная, through Russkaya Porечная. The Ukrainians were trying to attack Kosinca, this village, but the Russians managed to repel this attack and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. So most likely these small pockets still remains under complete Russian control, but the situation in this area is very difficult, and very likely the Russians would be forced to fall back. As for the southeastern direction, the Ukrainians managed to secure the village of Borki according to different pro-neutral mappers, and the Ukrainians conducted another attempt to attack in direction of the village Cherkasskaya Konopelka. The Russians reported that they managed to repel this attack and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. This is the situation in the Kursk direction. Now let's move further. The Russians managed to improve their positions and to restore control over the border in the vicinity of the village Kolotilovka. So this information was confirmed by different sources, including pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mappers. So in this video we can see the Russian soldier who was making a film, who was making a video exactly in the stronghold, in the checkpoint that was captured by the Ukrainians a day ago. Now let's move further, and we are going to the Pokrovsk and Toretsk, New York agglomeration, to the area of responsibilities of Group of Forces South and the Group of Forces Center. First, let's talk about New York. New York is about to be captured by the Russians completely. Toretsk is about to be captured by the Russians completely. Today we got one of the most important and the most significant updates since the beginning of the battle for Toretsk, and according to information that we received from different mappers and from different sources on the ground, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to force the Ukrainians to fall back from the Pivnichna coal mine, from the stronghold, from the citadel, from the one of the most important citadel in the battle for Toretsk. We are talking about this coal mine itself and the Terikon in the landfill to the west. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back towards the next citadel inside of Toretsk, and the forces of 41st Mechanized Brigade left Pivnichna completely, and now the Ukrainians are trying to prepare and trying to establish the defense belt in this city, the last city in Toretsk, in the Toretsk agglomeration. And some sources reported this morning of the local time that the Russians have already broke through the defense belt of Ukrainians and answered the citadel of Toretsk. If the eastern citadel of Toretsk falls, then we can start counting days when the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back completely towards the city of Konstantinovka. As you can see, the situation become very critical for the Ukrainians. Furthermore, as for the New York itself, today we got additional updates. First, we got reports again from different mappers that confirm confirms additional progress of the Russians in this energy facilities construction. And later we got the geolocation that was published by the Armored Forces of Ukraine, and in this video we can see a serious number of FPV drone strikes on Russian vehicles that were abandoned exactly in this part along the road, which confirms that the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt, to land the infantry and to capture the Ukrainian positions inside of this construction. So important progress, and currently if we calculate the distance between possible edge Russian positions in New York itself and the Russian positions inside of these energy facilities constructions, the current distance is already less than 2.5 kilometers. Obviously this is already a cauldron. Most likely if the Ukrainians want to save their personnel, they need to abandon their positions during the next few hours, not even days, towards the city of Toretsk. Only this is the only solution how to save the manpower and to continue their defense operation further in the north. Now let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russians continue offensive operation. The Ukrainians suffer significant losses, the Russians getting additional territory control. Let's talk about Zhelana, Novozhelana. During the previous 24 hours and during the previous 12 hours, according to different neutral mappers, the Russians captured the village of Zhelana completely. The Russians captured the village itself, the southeastern farms, the lakes, and the next tree lines. Furthermore, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians established complete control over this stronghold that the Ukrainians were controlling for a very long period of time. And that happened because the Russians managed to capture Mykolaiivka and to cut the main supply road. But we can't call this line as the main supply road because it's more like death road that Ukrainians were using to support somehow their forces here. But after the Ukrainians lost this death road, they were forced to fall back further in the southern direction. Some pro-Russian sources stated that the Russians continue offensive operation further, and as a result of fast lightning attack, the Russians secured the area of Novozhelana and entered the village of Zavitne, and currently the main clashes are taking place exactly in this part. Novozhelana was captured according to different pro-Russian military experts, and so approximately this is the territory of Russian control by the morning of 17th of August. The clashes are taking place in Zavitne, but most likely the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back from this area as well. Now the main supply road that Ukrainians have goes through Selidovo, Mikhailovka, Kemrik and Karlovka, but this road is already under complete Russian FPV drone control, and there are very high chances that this entire pocket will be captured by the Russians in the very near future. As for Grodovka, there are very heavy clashes during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night. The Russians managed to improve their positions on their flanks. The Russians captured this stronghold. The Russians captured this tree line that located to the southeast of Grodovka itself, so they increased the semi-encirclement of the city. And furthermore, don't forget that currently the Russians are increasing their pressure from this direction as well. I think that by the end of the weekend or by the beginning of the next week, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from Grodovka to the next defense line that was created along these fortifications. A very difficult situation for the Ukrainians. As for Novogrodovka, during the previous night we haven't received anything about this area. Now let's move further. We got additional updates from the South Donetsk direction, and the pro-Ukrainian sources confirms that the 57th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade finally broke through the Marinka-Ugledar road from the side of the Stolenka gully, and they secured the position 100-150 meters deep behind the road. So this is the river, this is Balka Salonika, that's the post that the author of the post was talking about, and according to him the Russians managed to capture the road, to cut this road physically and to improve their positions for another 100-150 meters in the northwestern direction. Obviously significant progress. We see that the Ukrainian front line in the Pokrovsk front line is crumbling, and we don't see anything that can improve the Ukrainian positions. They lost significant number of air defense systems, they lost additional aircraft systems, and probably this is just the beginning. Today we're going to receive additional updates, and probably they might be very, very difficult for the Ukrainians. And that's it for the video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.